Alrighty, good morning, everybody. My name is Rachel Garcia, and I am a undergraduate admissions counselor here at Baylor. Welcome to the social work premiere session. I'm here with one of our faculty members, Ms. Ramos Hoppe, and she is going to talk to us about social work. Please feel free to utilize the chat and the Q&A option, so this way we can answer your questions. But we'll go ahead and get started.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Rachel, for having me. I'm going to share some slides, so let me do that really quickly and see if my computer will let me. While I do that, I'll just introduce myself. Like Rachel said, my name is Luci Ramos Hoppe. I am the undergraduate program director and a lecturer in the School of Social Work. And Rachel, Zoom is not letting me share, so I'm wondering if you could pull the slides up on your end. Okay, we'll wait just a second. I'm not able to hear you. Can you still hear me?
My apologies, I was on mute. Sorry, everybody, technical issues here, but I can definitely share my screen, and you should see it now, and then just tell me when to hop forward.
Yeah, you can go ahead and go to the, skip the intro slide and go to this one right here. Perfect. So we are sharing with you today about the social work undergraduate major. Social work is a helping profession. It's a really broad profession. So one thing I note to students who are interested in studying social work is that it is a discipline that offers a pretty wide range of opportunities for engagement. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The name of our school is the Diana R. Garland School of Social Work. And as part of the Baylor family, we're obviously in a Christian context and equipping students to serve and to lead in whatever area of practice that they end up in as a social worker. You can go to the next slide. So social work is a professional degree. It's a protected title in Texas and requires a license. And so that means you can't just call yourself a social worker because you care about social justice or you want to work to help the underserved or the marginalized. So it functions a lot like nursing in this way. So there's a governing body, a national governing body called the Council on Social Work Education that ensures that accredited schools of social work are consistent in their degree plans. We obviously have some ways that we're unique because we're at Baylor, and every university has that bandwidth to pivot for what makes sense for them. And it requires a license. So I'm a licensed master social worker. I carry a license through the Texas Department of Health and Human Services. So that's another way. When you think about a major, there are majors that are a broader area of study, maybe something like history or English. And then there are professional degree programs like social work, nursing, speech pathology that are guided by external governance, and social work is one of those. We'll go to the next slide. I skipped one, I'm sorry. So who are social workers? You've probably met a social worker and didn't know it, or had somebody help you or lead a program that you were a part of or got benefits from that had a social work degree or license, and they weren't necessarily called a social worker. So one thing I tell my students is you're probably not going to graduate and go work for a social work firm. You're probably going to do something like work for a hospital and oversee discharge planning, or I worked in child welfare. I am a social worker, and that's part of my professional title. But in my role, I was a regional intake coordinator. That was the name of my role. I oversaw matching foster families and children through the I-35 corridor. My sister's also a social worker, and she had a more macro level philanthropic type of role, and she worked with big organizations in the DFW area like chambers of commerce, large philanthropies. So social workers, you kind of find them everywhere because we do anything from what we call micro work, so one-on-one work, to things like lobbying that are larger scale. So in the Garland School, there are some things that make us distinct compared to other schools of social work. One of those is that we talk a lot about the ethical integration of faith, spirituality and religion, and social work practice. So that doesn't mean that we give you a small theology degree while you're studying social work, but we really believe that spirituality and worldview are part of the whole person, and that the best way that we can serve individuals and communities is to be sure that we include that when we're assessing and developing strategies to support individuals, organizations, and communities. So you'll find that as a theme in our course sequence and in our course content. We have pretty small class sizes. I know every single one of my students by name. I know what kind of Yeti they bring to class, or little hydro flask. I know not all of you use Yetis. I know I know, like, if they had a bad day or they had a bad breakup, or I know about their families. And the reason I'm able to know that is because we have such a small class size. So our faculty to student ratio is really low. That's a time when you want a number to be low. We have a mentoring process in the School of Social Work. So you, as an undergraduate student, will have an opportunity to request a faculty mentor, and that individual is there not just to be your teacher, but to really talk you through kind of whatever is most important to you in that moment of your professional journey. So maybe you're struggling through a content area. Maybe you have a really deep passion about a certain population. Maybe you're the first person in your family to go to college, and you're really sorting through what that means and some additional areas of learning that come with that. So we have a building that's off main campus. We are in downtown Waco, and we're housed along with the Psychology Sleep Clinic and the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. And that allows us to be more like part of the Waco community. Baylor is part of the Waco community, but it just makes us a little bit more accessible to practitioners in town and to clients. Students complete an internship, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we look at the degree plan. But our placement downtown makes our location more convenient when students are interning. We also have a 5-year program. So if you are thinking about graduate school, you could come into the social work major and know that you could complete your 4-year degree, and then given that you would meet academic metrics for admission, you would be able to feed into our MSW, which is our Masters of Social Work program, and complete that in 10 months, which is pretty phenomenal. It's hard to find a graduate degree that's that short. But it's a thing that a lot of our graduates do. I would say about 50% of our seniors this year graduating will stay with us for their MSW next year. And because social work's so broad, we have students that come with different interests. So I have students that have stayed on with Baylor after undergrad, and they've done an MBA and an MSW together as a joint degree, or they've done an MDiv, which is a seminary degree, and an MSW together. And so we work with those other academic units to make a more unique opportunity for you for graduate education. Okay, so we're going to look at the degree plan. And I don't know if you necessarily call it that in high school still, but when you talk about the advising process, and we're talking about course scheduling. So we'll look at the next slide that shows when you enter the social work course sequence, which is usually your sophomore year. You can take you could take intro or human diversity and leadership earlier if you wanted to, but those are typically taken in the sophomore year. Our intro course is obviously a survey of what social work is. Human diversity and leadership is a required part of our degree plan, but it's also part of Baylor's core curriculum. So if you're interested in social work, but you're not quite sure where you want to land, most students change their major at some point. You could still take these courses and they would probably count as an elective. And then human diversity and leadership is part of the university's core curriculum. And that means that there's a real standard of accepting it as an elective across multiple degree plans in the university. So that means that if you majored in something else, it would still count for you. So your junior year is when you begin the main course sequence in social work. And we have what I call kind of like a theory course sequence and then a practice course sequence. So social work being a professional degree is really focused on what we're going to end up doing with our learning. So one thing I hear from underclassmen a lot is, I know what I'm interested in, but I'm not really sure what I want to do with it. Or I tell my parents I'm interested in this and they ask me how I'm going to make money doing my area of interest. That's a benefit of a degree plan. You have a very direct connection to a job after school. So our human behavior and the social environment course sequence is 2 courses, and they're both theory courses. One of them is about lifespan development. So what happens in a human from birth to death, which is obviously a lot. And learning about some of the theories around that and benchmarks across the individual lifespan. And then human behavior and the social environment 2 is about macro theory. So that course is about theories like social construction, symbols in society, how power and oppression function in society, how organizations thrive. We cover leadership theory in that course. And then our practice sequence kind of mirrors that what we call micro, so individual focus, and then a more macro focus. So our practice 1 course is where students learn the preliminary skills that they'll later use in engaging with clients. A very large percent of therapists in the United States are social workers. So if you've ever been to counseling, or met a therapist, their basic skills that they learn are the types that foundational work that they learn first before they learn all of their really clinical skills. Those are covered in the practice 1 course. And then our practice 2 and 3 courses are covering the models and frameworks that social workers use to lead groups like support groups, grief groups, psychoeducational groups, and then also work at a more macro scale. So if you ever track what someone like a community organizer does, even some folks who are involved in things like lobbying or politics or areas of the government, those things are covered in practice 3. Your senior year is really anchored in your internship. So one of the benefits of the social work degree is that when you leave, you will already have had a year-long professional internship under the guidance of a social worker who's in the field. So the 4491 and 4492 courses are kind of they're not blended together, but they feel like the same course. You're in that course with that professor all year. And so you're really able to track with your professor deeply about what's happening in your internship. And that's your opportunity to take your academic learning and apply it in the practice world. So in real time with real clients, who are not, like a vignette or gonna follow the rules or follow what you think is gonna happen. And then students also take a research sequence. So that's a data analysis course, and then a social work research course where you complete a research project, and then a policy course. So we have 3 minors in the School of Social Work: poverty studies and social justice, gerontology, and then it should say civic interfaith studies. So that's the discipline of learning what it might look like to have people from different faith traditions or religious backgrounds come together for productive dialogue for the common good. Um, if you major in social work, you can minor in something else. And, you probably have learned a lot about study abroad. The things that if you've gone to another premier event for another major, some of those things still hold for study abroad. So we still have students who go for the summer or go for a semester before their internship if they want to do that. And I covered the first 2 electives. The other elective that we have is a leadership and Enneagram course. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Enneagram. It's an ancient personality tool. It has some spiritual and really reflective components to that, and that's another elective that we offer. We also offer electives around gerontology, child maltreatment, foster care and adoption, trauma, loss, and mourning, grief work, aging and mental health. So there's several different electives that are offered in the School of Social Work. So I have talked long enough. I'll go ahead and take questions if there are any. I see one that says, would occupational therapy with kids need social work? The answer is yes. So if you can think of any space where people are needing help, a social worker probably can fit in that space. So some examples for where social workers, where you would find them, would be hospitals, hospice care, residential facilities. So if you have a juvenile who's on probation and admitted into a residential treatment center, social workers work there. Certainly in like a physical therapy clinic, an occupational therapy clinic. We have quite a few students who they might have an interest in a certain population, and that's really what draws them to social work. So, students or kids on the autism spectrum, or children with disabilities, or persons in addiction. We have a lot of students who come that want to do something on behalf of populations that are marginalized or have struggled for justice and certain rights. I see a question about a couple, marriage, family, and couples therapist. I will say that there's a different licensing path if you would want to major in sociology or psychology, and they're less direct. So you could do 5 years of school and so for social work and exit and start work as a therapist. You would end up needing to clock hours for a clinical license. And if you changed your tune and you wanted to do something else, you could in social work. So you could pivot. So you could burn out being a therapist, and then your back half of your career decide you want to be a school social worker, or you want to work in a legislative office, or you want to work with older adults in a hospital. If you pick a track like an LMFT track, licensed marriage and family therapist, those are very specific. So there's not the opportunity to switch gears in those licensure paths. So obviously I'm a social worker, so I have a prejudice for that or a bent toward that. But I would note that psychology and sociology aren't professional degree programs, so there's a difference there. I see a question about equine therapy. That's common. I have a former student who's a clinical social worker, and she does equine therapy. There are so many types of interests in social work because it's so broad. All our internships are in the Waco area if you're an undergrad. In our master's program, we have internships all over the country. There are not study abroad programs just for social work. Most of Baylor's study abroad programs are open across, a lot of them are open across majors. So I wouldn't worry about picking a major for a certain study abroad. And licensing can be reciprocal across states. If you wanted to be a children's social worker in school after graduating, I think you could simply apply for a job working with children. Children and families is a really big concentration area for social work. I don't know. I see a question about biggest challenges in building a career after getting a degree. I don't know that they're much different than just graduating in general. I think the benefit of social work is that it's a professional program. So you graduate, you sit for a licensure exam, and when you're applying for a job, you have a professional resume built out already, which I have found that to be a benefit for students. I also have a lot of students that major in social work and go to law school. So if you're interested in that, they're a really good combination. Rachel, are we about out of time?
Yeah, we currently don't have any questions in the chat, but if someone wants to ask one last quick questions, we have time for one last quick question. We have zoomed through those questions. That's awesome. Great answers, great questions.
Yeah, any other questions?
Okay, okay, we have one. Is it hard to get into the School of Social Work?
I don't know that it's like harder than other majors necessarily. You have to have a 2.7 GPA. There's an admission process. So you enter as a pre-social work major. And then you are admitted, you're guided through the admissions process, in some ways an intro to social work. So you wouldn't just be out there on your own trying to figure it out. But we'd love to have you.
And then last question here is, what year do you go to the downtown location?
You would still be taking courses all on campus. So that's not going to stop. You're just going to start taking our underclassmen courses meet on main campus, like intro and human diversity and leadership. So once you're a junior and senior, you would take classes downtown. If you haven't been to Waco, downtown is 5 minutes from Baylor campus. It's just across the highway. So, if you're from a big city, that might sound like you'd be doing a commute. In Waco, you wouldn't.
Yes. All right, that's all the questions that we have. And that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much, Professor Ramos-Hoppe, for your time. And to everyone, amazing questions. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us, especially in our admissions office at admissions@baylor.edu. That's our email. Y'all enjoy the rest of your premiere session and have a great afternoon. Thank you again. Bye-bye.